Imagine a building for an organization that just had Ethernet jacks everywhere. Meaning you could walk into the reception area, there's one. You walk into some cubicles, there's some Ethernet jacks. You walk outside of the building, and even on the outside, kind of in the paneling of the building, there's just Ethernet jacks everywhere, so that people in the neighborhood could just come up and plug their laptop in and just get whatever access they needed. Now it sounds crazy, but that's exactly what you do when you implement a wireless network without security. It's just an open door right into your organization. So what we'll be talking about here is the wireless security and implementation standards and considerations you'll have to think about when you're setting up a wireless network. First off, I'll look at the dangers of wireless networks and then the security evolution, how the security has evolved to address those dangers. Finally, we'll take a look at basic wireless design and implementation, ideas that you need to have in your mind when you're setting up a wireless network. If you've been in technology for a while, you may recognize a term, war dialing. I remember back in the days of my Commodore Amiga. That was my first real computer that I got to play with. I set up a BBS, which is a bulletin board system, before the internet was around. And people would dial up all times of the day and night to my BBS to trade files and leave messages and so on. And back in that time, there was this concept known as war dialing, where if I was a hacker, and I am ashamed to say that I did this, I would set up my modem to dial every phone number that's in my area. I mean, all hours of the day and night, it would just dial and see if there was other modems to connect to. And what you would do is you would actually find, other modems that were out there that gave you connect messages. And from there on out, you could go back and try and hack into those phone numbers and get into organizations that way. Well, that security has evolved and a new term has emerged that you can see right on the screen, war driving. I almost said dialing again. War driving. It's where you actually put an antenna on your car and you drive around an area sniffing for wireless networks that exist. In the same way that you would just dial phone numbers before, just driving by networks can detect wireless networks that are available. It's a hacker's first method that they'll use to find out if wireless networks are even available. Now, for some intruders, it ends there. I'll have to admit, I've been driving through neighborhoods and I've gotten to, a friend's house early and I don't want to, intrude if they're not ready. And I've got my laptop in my car. I'm like, well, hey, I can clean out all my email. So I drive until I find some neighborhood wireless access point that's wide open with no security, and I join that and just use it to access the internet. That's believe it or not, a form of hacking, and that's where a lot of it ends. But that's where it moves into a danger, the more so danger, in the next piece over here of the hacker. He looks like he's smiling and a happy fellow, but those hackers can get into your organizations to do a lot. Some of them are just out to do damage, and you try and wonder, well, what kind of mindset would do that? A lot of people do it just for the challenge, just to wreak havoc because they can, because they have a destructive personality. They're going to try and get into your organization and do whatever damage they can to the servers and the equipment that's on there. Some of them are out there to steal information. They may have been hired by other companies. They may just be looking for credit card numbers or some other sensitive information. But once they get into your wireless network, they can begin attacking your internal servers to do that. The last one down there, I know the picture's kind of goofy, but employees can become one of your worst nightmares in wireless. What many organizations have found is that banning wireless access was the worst move they could have done. Meaning that there's organizations that said there will be no wireless access for our company because we don't think it's secure enough, or they just don't want to introduce that threat into their organization. So they pass that policy and they just say, hey, we're not going to set up wireless access for you. Well, employees will come in with their own wireless access points because they're desperate. They've got laptops and they want to be able to use them wirelessly. And they'll actually plug in wireless access points under their desk in their cubicle to allow themselves to have wireless access. A lot of people call those rogue wireless access points. And that is the worst thing that you could have. You would have been better off setting up company wireless where you could at least have control over the security than have some, brandless wireless access point come in that is just wide open and no security, sending your signal out into the street all around your organization. So those are the dangers of wireless. War driving, just trying to get in and get some internet access, hackers that are being malicious, and employees who just, through ignorance a lot of times, will bring in their own wireless equipment to try and set up wireless for their own little cubicle area. That's where our wireless security standards jump into place. A security standard to meet every one of those concerns. First off is authentication. You want to make sure that the people who are using your wireless network are supposed to be there. So authentication could be requiring a username and a password that says only these people will be allowed. Authentication could be setting it up to where only certain laptops or devices are allowed to join, meaning you actually install what's known as a certificate on those laptops, and they present that certificate every time they want to join the wireless network to say, I am an allowed device. Wireless security also moves in the form of encryption, meaning every single thing that you send across the network will be encrypted and scrambled. So if somebody is out there doing some war driving and packet sniffing over the wireless network, every single thing that they grab will just be scrambled. You want to secure the data that's sent over the wireless network. And last but not least, it's the least employed method, but very valuable, is intrusion prevention system. What that is there for is to detect those rogue wireless access points on your network, to make sure that the access points that are there should be there. And that's a system. I have a little laser there as the picture. It's a system that should immediately act like a tripwire. If somebody sets up a wireless network and they're not supposed to be there, it will actually set off a sensor and it will say, hey, I've detected this access point that just showed up in our network. That should not have been there. And it will immediately either shut down the switch port it's connected to or send you a message on a pager, a cell phone, an email that says this was detected in this radius in this zone. So by combining those three things together, you can have solid wireless security. Now, I want to make sure everybody understands. Wireless is a scary thing to set up if you don't know what security measures are at your disposal. Meaning, if you just go out there and deploy wireless and say, oh, we'll just use this and that, kind of this smorgasbord security, that's scary. But there is a right way that you can set up this data. Meaning that I don't want to ever give you the idea when I'm talking about wireless security, because we'll talk more about it, but I don't want to give you the idea that, oh man, these security standards not good. You want to stay away from this. A lot of people go out saying, oh, wireless. It's kind of like, ooh, don't look over there. You don't want that technology. There is a proper way to set this up, and there is a way that the wireless security can be, I'll say, as good, and that's a brave statement, as good as the wired security that's going through your network, meaning you get just the same level of security on the wireless as you do on a wired connection. So this is the evolution that wireless security has gone through. The original security method was known as pre-shared key WEP. Now that, if we were still in the web days, I would not have made the recommendation I just did. I would say, don't do wireless. Don't. It's a scary place. WEP was the initial security method that was considered extremely weak. Meaning it had many issues. There was a lot of known attacks where you could break through those encryption keys. Now let me talk about pre-shared keys. Pre-shared keys is a system of security where you type in a key on the wireless access point. We'll say the key is CBT nuggets, and then all of the other clients that join in have to type in the same key. So all the laptops use that same pre-shared key, and that generates the encryption keys that are used. Now, pre-shared keys are great for small organizations and home offices and stuff like that, but they pose a lot of challenges because, let's say, an employee leaves the company. Well, they have the pre-shared key, and now they could, potentially be a danger if they were to come back to the organization and sit in the parking lot. They would have that same pre-shared key. So you can imagine whenever a change like that happens, you have to change the keys on everybody. And that means you have to go to every laptop and every wireless device and type in the new key. Now, couple that with the idea that pre-shared keys are considered weaker the longer that they're used, meaning you should rotate them on at least a monthly basis. That's going to be a lot of work for you as the network grows. So pre-shared keys, great for small offices, but as you get into bigger organizations, they pose problems. And WEP was considered extremely weak. There's a lot of vulnerabilities. So the first major evolution in security is we went to this pre-shared key, WPA. Now, WPA, this is also known as WPA1, was an interesting challenge, meaning the industry realized that WEP had issues. There was a ton of issues with it. And so the powers that be, the organizations that came up with those standards, said we need to do away with WEP. But the problem is we've already manufactured all this wireless equipment that has kind of WEP hardware, meaning the chips on there can't really handle a lot of stronger encryption methods. So they sent out a challenge saying we need a better method that uses the same wireless hardware without, changing out everybody's cards. And that's where WPA1 first emerged. WPA1 was a kind of interim solution that would improve the security, improve the encryption from WEP without changing out all the hardware. Now, it wasn't perfect, but it was a huge stride over WEP, meaning there was a lot better encryption method. It's actually known as TKIP. That's the encryption method that was used with WPA1. So it was kind of an interim solution. It still used pre-shared keys. So quickly, right after that came out, the evolution number 2 happened, which was WPA and 802.1x authentication. Now, I know I'm just throwing a lot of terms out there, and that's all this is meant to be, is a high-level overview of where this went. But 802.1x is a standard for authenticating who you are, meaning a username and password or a certificate, just like I was talking about before. Here's the idea. We wanted to have a method that did away with this pre-shared key system, meaning when a laptop or wireless device, this is my pathetic drawing of a laptop, joins the network and goes to the access point, rather than checking to see if it has the same pre-shared key installed, it will pass a username and password to the wireless access point, who will then pass it to some server. Maybe it's a Windows server behind the scenes that's going to say, is this username and password or is this certificate allowed? And the server will say, why, yes, that is a username and password that's allowed. On the fly at that point, the access point, that's my key, and the laptop will generate a set of encryption keys that are used for that session. Meaning it's not a pre-shared key, they just generate an encryption algorithm that will be used just for that session, for as long as that laptop is connected to the access point, and as soon as it disconnects, it's gone. And then the next time it'll re-authenticate and generate a fresh set of encryption keys. So you don't have the same key that's used again and again and again and again. It'll be renegotiated every single time the client joins the network. Furthermore, if this laptop belongs to somebody that leaves the company, well, then you just go to the server and say, okay, their username and password is no longer allowed. And the next time this person tries to join the network, it'll say, oh, you're John. Sorry, John. You've been cut off, and you do not get a set of keys for the network, and you can no longer join the wireless access point. So that was a much more improved solution to the pre-shared keys, but it still used WPA1. And I should put a little 1 after this. Just, anytime you see WPA, you can assume it's WPA1. So the encryption it was not horrible, but it still left a lot to be desired. So the final evolution that we had was WPA2. That officially became called 802.11i, meaning it became a standard that was widely supported. And this was the point where they said, you know what? We're doing away with all the old methods, all the old hardware that was used to support that. We're upgrading it all. So in order to do WPA2 and support this new style of encryption, it's actually known as AES, is the encryption type, you have to buy new hardware. Now, I'll say since about 2004, WPA2 hardware has been shipped and all the new stuff has been supporting that. So if you've bought wireless stuff in the last 3, 4, 5 years, it probably will do WPA2 methods. You just need to go in there and configure it to do that. So that is the better and now the standard method of doing encryption, and you combine that with the authentication for some perfect network security. Now, with all this authentication system and all this in mind, they do still support pre-shared key. You'll see it abbreviated PSK. They still support pre-shared keys for WPA1 and WPA2. Because there's companies and there's homes where you just don't have the equipment to set up a full-blown server with usernames and passwords and all that, and you don't really want to. You're okay just going to the 3 laptops that you have or 2 laptops and saying, this is the pre-shared key. So nowadays you can choose any one of these methods. WEP is still around and you can still select it, WPA1 and WPA2, with either pre-shared key or 8021X. Now let's take a turn from the security measures that we have into the design and implementation of wireless. When we set up our wireless network, we will be required to specify at least one SSID. That is a service set identifier. That's the name of your network. If you've ever joined a wireless network, you open your laptop and you click on the little wireless icon. And it says, oh, I found some networks that are available. One of them is named Netgear. One of them is named Linksys because the people who set them up never changed the name. One of them might be named Goliath, or some cool name like that. So you just come up with a unique name for your wireless network, and it identifies it and separates it. Now, here's the power that you have with that. You can have one wireless access point that sends out multiple SSIDs. Now, we're talking getting into the complex stuff here. But I could have, for instance, a wireless access point for my company that has maybe an SSID named public and an SSID named private. The people that join the public network maybe aren't required to have any security settings at all, meaning that they can just join. It doesn't require WEP or WPA. You just get on. But the only thing the wireless access point will allow them to reach is the internet at that point. They can't access any of the internal company stuff. To join the private one, that's where you need the WPA2 and the encryption and all that. And if you specify the right settings, then you can get into the company network and access the internal resources. So having multiple SSIDs is usually a good idea for most organizations. So once you set up the SSID, you'll turn on the wireless client, and here's what happens. Your laptop or the client will send a probe into the network. It's just a wireless beacon saying, hello, what is out there? All the wireless access points that get that probe will respond with a beacon of their own saying, oh, we're here and we have these SSIDs that you are able to join. The client says, well, I would like that one. I want to join the public one that lets me get on the internet. So the client will associate with the chosen SSID whatever access point that they're closest to, meaning whichever one gives them the stronger signal will be the one to pick them up and say, okay, I'll take ownership of that client and I'll now forward their traffic so that they can access the internet. The access point will then add the client MAC address to its association table. That's how it takes ownership. It says, I see that network card and I will own that MAC address. So from there on out, as long as the client stays in the same place, it will go through that access point and access the internet. Now let's say that person picks up their laptop and starts walking, 200 feet down the hall to another cubicle. Well, if the signal gets too weak, the wireless client will start sending out the probes again saying, hello, I'm looking for this wireless network. The closer access point at that point, maybe that's 200 feet away, will say, oh, I see, you can jump on over to me. So it will do a reassociation request saying, I'd like to go to the closer one now, and associate with the new access point who will take ownership of it as long as it stays within that region. So when you're designing a wireless network with that capability in mind, meaning that clients can roam between access points and move around, the best way to design it is to have a 10 to 15% overlap in your radio frequency service areas. Now, how do you figure that out? I mean, how do you like feel it? Is it like an ESP thing where you're like, oh, I can feel the signal fading here? They actually make all kinds of equipment, wireless testing equipment. Fluke Network, Fluke. Fluke Networks makes some of the most well-known stuff, but most expensive, where you have little handheld devices that you can walk around with. Me, personally, I am extremely cheap, and I don't like buying expensive stuff that costs thousands of dollars that I can do cheaper. So what I do when I'm specking out a wireless network is there's actually programs, they're just called sniffers, that you can install on your laptop. And as you walk around with your laptop, sure, it's not as lightweight as one of those little handheld devices that Fluke Network sells, but you can just walk around with your laptop and it'll tell you, okay, the signal percentage is about 60%. Oh, you're 40%, 20, 10. Okay, stop. And you can just stand there with your laptop and say, okay, we need a new access point somewhere over there. That's going to give us a good range. So that'll allow you to get that 10 to 15% overlap. Yeah, it will take some troubleshooting and trial and error, but you should be able to get a good wireless blanket that will give you that good spread across your organization. Now, repeaters. Let me talk about those devices. Those are devices that will take an existing wireless signal and repeat it and extend it a little bit further. The idea is this. Where's my pen? We've got a wireless access point. If we were looking physically, this is connected to some, Cisco switch or some switch behind the scenes, and so is this. There's some cable that's run over here, and that's how it bridges people from the wireless into your network. But maybe you've got maybe a section of the warehouse where there is no cable over here. And to get a cable person out there is very difficult, or, it'd be very costly to do that. What you can buy is just a wireless repeater that will take the signal from this wireless access point and extend it beyond what it could normally reach. There are some disadvantages to doing that, and the signal usually isn't anywhere near as clean out in this area, but it can get you a signal where you couldn't previously get. You got to have a good 50% overlap for a repeater to work successfully. So it's not as good as actually running another cable over here and installing a real wireless access point. Finally, bordering access points, as we talked about in the previous video, should have different channels. You don't, my logic when I first got into this is, oh, we put them all in the same channel. That'll help, right? That's exactly what you don't want to do. Like if this is using channel 1, you want this one to be on channel 6 to make sure that the overlap happens, but when the client roams, when it's in this zone and kind of jumps over to this access point, it's not going to get interference issues when it's in this overlap area. So even the repeater should be on maybe channel 11 to give it a different frequency range so it's not interfering, it's more of supplementing the existing access point. The last part of design that we'll talk about here is just the terminology that's used. You'll see it documented all the time on Cisco's website. BSS and ESS. A basic service set is a single access point, and I should expound on that, and all of the service area that it's able to reach. So if I just had one access point in my network and it was broadcasting its signal out, that would be a single basic service set that's advertising its SSID. Now, we've got a wireless access point right here, which is also considered a basic service set. But when both of those are combined and linked up to a switched network and are working for a common goal, meaning they're both working in conjunction, they're on different channels, they allow roaming when a client goes between them, that is considered an extended service set. I didn't quite know how to write that. It's two or more BSSs. That's my little s on there. So when they're joined into a common system, that's the goal. Now, let me just give you a piece of the wireless world. It's not covered in the CCENT or CCNA side of things, but there is a whole wireless track that you can go through to learn more about it. And one of the big concepts that you'll look at is this idea of roaming. When you combine multiple access points into a single system, it allows for roaming, but there's more to configure. Because if you have a laptop, say you've got this laptop right here. Yeah, let's see if this works. This would be kind of cool. Look at that. Animation at its best. We've got a laptop that joins the wireless network, and we're kind of walking around and getting our wireless signal. As it goes to here, it's going to start saying, oh, my signal's getting weak from my access point. And you can see as it starts crossing that boundary, it's going to say, let me fail over and use this access point. So as it moves into this area further away from this one, it'll say, I've failed over and used this one. That's known as roaming. The problem is that the client will lose its signal temporarily and then fail over. So all your network connection is kind of lost for a second or two while it roams to the new one. Now, with an extended service set like we've got down here, we can set it up where there's seamless roaming. And that's great because they already have wireless IP phones, meaning phones that use the data network. And if it drops for a second or two as it's going between access points, that's not good. You lose phone calls when that happens. So what we can have is roaming where a client moves between these two and no connectivity is lost. That's only possible with an extended service set. Last but not least, let's look at implementing or setting up a wireless network, the steps that you need to walk through. First thing to do when you're setting up a wireless network is to pre-test the switch port that you plan on attaching the wireless access point to with the laptop. Meaning before you plug in the access point, plug just a laptop or a PC into that switch port, make sure that it gets the right IP address, make sure that you can access the internet or whatever resources you're trying to access, make sure that everything works good on that switch port. You want to make sure the foundation is good. Second step is to connect the wireless access point, plug it in if necessary. There's actually switches out there that can power the access point without it needing a plug, and it will, it will power on and start glowing and stuff like that. And I say glowing. This down here, you grab my pen. This is a pretty sweet access point. That's Cisco's kind of consumer line access point where it just, standard internal to a company access point. And you can see it's got a circle there. This thing actually glows. It's pretty awesome. When it's good, it glows blue, and it's kind of like, ooh, the blue orb is glowing. If something goes wrong, it'll actually start glowing red. I like colors. I like pretty stuff, and that's what Cisco does. So you connect it up, and you've got the access point glowing. Set up and test your first SSID. Create a network. Call it Cisco. Call it whatever. And test it with no security. You want to do this in a layered approach. You want to make sure that you can join that SSID with no security with a laptop. Obviously, make sure that it's not able to broadcast out and cause a big security vulnerability. Just do it in a lab environment. Make sure that the laptop can join and access the internet and the resources that it wants. Second is add and test security using a pre-shared key. So now go ahead and add WEP if you dare, or WPA1 or WPA2 to your wireless network, and test it just using a simple pre-shared key. That'll make sure that the laptop supports the encryption type and that everything is still working, and you kind of work in this layer. A lot of times, I know I've done this a million times, is you walk into this network and you're ready to set up wireless, so you pre-configure it with everything. You don't test the switch port and you plug it all in, and it doesn't work. So you have to back off and you say, okay, well, where do I even start troubleshooting? So by working through it step by step this way, you'll have a foundation. You know the switch port works. You know that it works without security. Now you know it works with security using a pre-shared key. The final step is to add in authentication if you want to do that. If you have a back-end server that has all the usernames and passwords, go ahead and add that in now and turn on the authentication and make sure that works. That way, if it doesn't work, it's directly related to the server or the authentication, rather than being a encryption problem. That is the overview of wireless at the CCENT and CCNA levels. Cisco does not expect you to know configuration screens or command line interfaces or anything like that for wireless access points. Honestly, wireless access points are relatively easy to set up. They usually have a little wizard that you just click, click, click. There we go. We're up and running. So most of the time, if you know the foundation and the concepts, the design and security of what's out there, you'll be able to figure out how to set up the access point itself. So we did talk about the dangers of wireless networks. If you just set them up without security, you are susceptible to war driving, people just using your internet access, sniffing and hacking attacks that will compromise your internal resources, and employees. You've got to watch out for those as the danger of wireless networks that can come in and plug in wireless access points that are not secured. We then looked at the wireless security evolution, starting off with WEP, which was just a bad security system, and moving into some very secure systems with WPA 1 and 2, along with 802.1x authentication. Finally, we looked at the design of wireless networks and the steps to walk through a successful implementation. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.